In '44, the U.S. Treasury released a list of the nation's wealthiest. Topping the list for women wasn't an oil heiress, but a former homeless orphan who once slept on old newspapers in the New York subway. This woman pulled in $400,000 a year, 5 times what President Roosevelt earned. And the kicker, wartime laws said she couldn't legally make that kind of money, but she single-handedly cracked the federal system and put Hollywood on the meter. Producers loathed her for refusing to fix her crooked teeth. Husbands trembled in her presence. She systematically carved out every human weakness to ensure she'd never be a victim again. Today, we'll strip the mask off Hollywood's Iron Lady and uncover how Barbara Stanwyck turned her emotional scars into a multi-million-dollar empire. This isn't a story about becoming a star. It's about killing the victim inside and becoming the predator. Act 1. The greatest role never to win an Oscar, Mrs. Taylor. To grasp the true tragedy of Barbara Stanwyck, you have to peel back the gloss on her most famous project, her marriage to Robert Taylor. In Hollywood lore, they were the golden couple, the epitome of marital fidelity and harmony. But if you dissect this union through the lens of psychology and the harsh laws of the '30s film industry, you won't find a love story. Instead, you'll uncover a complex business transaction steeped in fear, control, and loneliness. This was Stanwyck's greatest acting performance, a role she played non-stop for 12 years, never breaking character for a moment. In '39, MGM found itself in a crisis. Their main asset, Robert Taylor, teetered on the brink of ruin. Taylor was an idol. His chiseled face adorned candy boxes, and women were crazy about him. But within the industry, everyone knew the truth. Behind the macho image was a soft, insecure man who, persistent rumors suggested, preferred male company. In the era of the Hays Code, where any hint of moral indecency could end a career, Taylor stood vulnerable. Louis Mayer, the tyrannical studio head, understood that the golden boy urgently needed a beard, a woman to provide him with an alibi. Enter Barbara Stanwyck. Why would she, already an established star with a steely grip, agree to this charade? The answer lies in her past. After enduring the violence and chaos of her first husband, Frank Fay, Stanwyck feared aggressive, dominant men. Robert Taylor was the perfect choice, passive, infantile, and entirely safe. This was a marriage not of passion but of calculation on both sides. He gained protection from rumors. She gained the status of a married woman, and most importantly, total control over the situation. Stanwyck didn't just marry Taylor, she adopted him. In their secluded mansion, a peculiar hierarchy reigned. She called him Junior or Baby, while he referred to her only as Queen. Barbara took on the roles of his producer, manager, and press secretary. She edited his scripts, pushed him to demand higher fees, and taught him how to stand before the camera to appear more masculine. She molded him into a star with the same dedication Pygmalion had for Galatea. For a woman who grew up in orphanages, this total control became a surrogate for love. She believed that if she became indispensable to this man, if she solved all his problems, he would never leave her. She bought his loyalty with her care and strength. Rumors of a lavender marriage always followed them, but Stanwyck fiercely attacked any journalist who dared question their happiness. She crafted the perfect picture: a ranch, horses, evenings by the fireplace. But biographers claim that behind this idol lay emptiness. Taylor, feeling inadequate next to such a powerful woman, began seeking comfort elsewhere, and not always with women. Stanwyck knew everything, but she, the Iron Lady, chose to ignore it. For her, maintaining the facade mattered more than personal happiness. Divorce would mean admitting defeat, acknowledging that her investments had failed. And Barbara Stanwyck hated losing. The collapse came in '50. Baby grew up and rebelled. Tired of being an eternal appendage to his great wife, tired of her overbearing care, Taylor demanded freedom. For Stanwyck, it was a blow akin to a physical injury. The system she had built brick by brick crumbled. The man she created rejected her. Her reaction to the divorce became legendary. She didn't throw a public fit. Instead, she conducted perhaps the coldest and most ruthless cleansing ritual. She gathered all the things that reminded her of their life together: antique furniture, paintings, gifts, and auctioned them off. She sold the past under the hammer, as if saying, "If you're leaving, I erase you from my reality." But this was just an outward show of her defense. The paradox is that by erasing Taylor's traces from her home, she canonized him in her soul. Until the end of her days, even 30 years after the divorce, she called him the love of her life. Why? Because for Barbara Stanwyck, the myth was safer than reality. Admitting that their marriage was a deal that ended in bankruptcy proved too painful. It was easier for her to play the role of the great widow with a living husband than to admit she remained that lonely girl Ruby, whom no one truly wanted to protect. She remained faithful not to Robert Taylor, but to the image of the perfect life she had created for herself and so desperately wanted to believe in. Act 2, 400,000 a year, how she took on the U.S. government. To truly grasp the magnitude of Barbara Stanwyck's impact, you need to step away from the spotlights, red carpets, and Oscars. Dive into the dry ledgers of World War II. That's where the real drama lies, revealing more about her character than any role she ever played. In '44, the U.S. Treasury released its annual report on the highest-earning citizens. It was a bombshell. Topping the list among all women wasn't a Vanderbilt heiress, a steel magnate's widow, or an oil tycoon. It was Barbara Stanwyck. Her declared income? $400,000. To us, that number might seem abstract, but let's translate it into the reality of the '40s. The average American worker made about $2,000 a year. President Franklin Roosevelt earned $75,000. Stanwyck made 5 times more than the leader of a nation at war. But the real shocker wasn't the astronomical sum. It was that by the laws of the time, she technically wasn't allowed to earn that much. In '42, after the U.S. entered the war, Roosevelt's administration passed an unprecedented Stabilization Act to combat inflation. The government essentially froze wages nationwide. Employers couldn't raise salaries without special permission from Washington. For Hollywood studio bosses like Louis Mayer at MGM and Jack Warner at Warner Brothers, this law was a godsend. It gave them the perfect excuse for their greed. The era's biggest stars, Clark Gable, Bette Davis, Judy Garland, stormed into producers' offices demanding raises, only to be met with feigned helplessness. "We'd love to shower you with gold, but the law's the law. Uncle Sam says no." Actors trapped in ironclad 7-year contracts were stuck. Inflation soared, taxes strangled, and their incomes were frozen by the state. Barbara Stanwyck was the only one in Hollywood who found a loophole in this federal armor and exploited it to crack the system. Her secret weapon, forged over years, was her status as a free agent. Back in the '30s, she realized that an exclusive studio contract was just high-paid slavery. The studio decided everything: which films to do, what to say to the press, even who to marry. Stanwyck ditched stability for freedom. She belonged to no studio. Legally, she wasn't a salaried employee, but an independent contractor, a business entity providing services. When the war hit and the wage freeze law kicked in, Stanwyck's lawyers played this card brilliantly. They proved her fees weren't salaries regulated by law. They were the market value of a one-time service, renegotiated for each new project. While other stars sat on fixed pre-war salaries, Stanwyck struck new deals for every film. She turned it into a bidding war between Paramount, RKO, Warner Brothers, and Universal. Her strategy was aggressive and genius. She created an artificial scarcity of herself. Studios hated her independence, but had to pay because her films guaranteed profit. She squeezed producers dry. For her role in the iconic noir Double Indemnity, she earned a fee that exceeded some independent films' entire budgets. She stumped the government's restrictions, proving a private contract could trump federal leveling. But behind this financial triumph lay a dark side, unspoken by the papers. To earn that $400,000, Barbara Stanwyck worked herself to the bone, starring in 3 to 4 films a year without breaks or vacations. It was grueling labor. But what drove her? Greed? A desire for diamonds or yachts? No. Stanwyck lived a pointedly modest life. Her motivation was purely psychological, rooted in the deep trauma of orphanhood. In her value system, money wasn't for pleasure. Money was the brick she used to build a wall between herself and the terror of poverty. She had an irrational, panicked fear that everything would vanish tomorrow, that the phone would stop ringing, beauty would fade. She never saw herself as beautiful, and the public would find a new idol. Back then, the tax on super incomes reached 90%. The government took the lion's share of earnings, but even that didn't stop her. What mattered was the act of accumulation, the victory over circumstances. By putting the U.S. government and the Hollywood machine on notice, she achieved her main goal. She bought herself the right to depend on no one. In a world where women were either ornaments or victims, she became a predator who set her own hunting rules. But the price of this freedom was steep. She turned into a money-making machine that simply couldn't stop, even when the war ended and the threat of poverty was gone for good. Act 3. Ruby Stevens, the girl who slept on newspapers. To truly grasp the chilling, almost metallic hardness in Barbara Stanwyck's gaze, a look that made men on screen avert their eyes, you must take a trip to hell. Forget the Hollywood hills. Transport yourself to the grimy, coal-scented, hopeless neighborhoods of the early 20th century. Legend has it that the star named Barbara Stanwyck was born on Broadway. But the harsh, ugly truth says otherwise. Barbara Stanwyck was the armor forged by a little girl named Ruby Catherine Stevens to protect herself from a world trying to destroy her. Ruby's first lesson that the universe is chaotic, cruel, and utterly indifferent to human life came when she was just 4 years old. It happened in 1911 in the city of Chelsea, Massachusetts. The script of this tragedy wasn't penned by a brilliant playwright, but by blind chance. Her mother, Catherine Stevens, returned home on a streetcar. One jolt, one drunk passenger losing balance, and the young woman fell from the moving car right under the metal wheels. Death was instant. For 4-year-old Ruby, it was the end of childhood. She didn't just lose her mother, she lost the only unconditional protection nature offers. But the real nightmare began after the funeral. Her father, Byron Stevens, was a man broken by grief and his own weakness. Instead of becoming a wall for his orphan children, he chose to run. Just 2 weeks after his wife's funeral, he announced he was leaving to work on the construction of the Panama Canal. He kissed the kids and walked out the door. Ruby never saw him again. He sent no letters, no money. He simply vanished, erasing his daughter from his life like a failed line in a draft. So Ruby Stevens became a full orphan with a living father. She became a ward of the state, a banner passed around the foster care system. The next 10 years of her life were a kaleidoscope of other people's homes, foster families, and cold rooms where she lived out of charity or for a government stipend. In these homes, she wasn't beaten, but something worse happened. She was ignored. They provided her food and a roof, but never warmth. Ruby quickly learned the main rule of survival. Attachment is pain. If you love no one, you can't be betrayed. If you expect nothing, you're invincible. She learned to be invisible, convenient, and most importantly, completely self-reliant. By her teenage years, she realized education was a privilege of the rich. School couldn't feed her. At 13, she dropped out, forged documents to add years to her age, and went to work. And here we reach the image that became the foundation of her persona, but was so carefully hidden by studio publicists. In between low-paying jobs, when she got fired from the department store where she packed parcels or from the telephone exchange, young Ruby literally found herself on the street. The story of her sleeping in the subway isn't a pretty metaphor. It's a documented fact of her biography. Picture this, the future queen of the screen, a woman whose wealth would be counted in millions, curled up on a hard wooden bench in the subway or in the theater cloakroom. Instead of a blanket, she used stacks of old newspapers. The smell of printer's ink, dampness, and rat poison etched into her subconscious forever. It was there, shivering from the cold on a pile of scrap paper, that she made her main contract, a contract with herself. She vowed to claw her way out of poverty at any cost. She decided that money was the only reality she could rely on. Not love, not talent, not luck, but cold cash that would shield her from the cold. Unlike many actresses who came to the movies for fame, self-expression, or art, Ruby Stevens came driven by a primal fear of hunger. This fear turned her into the perfect soldier of the industry. She took any job, endured any conditions, learned to dance in third-rate cabarets where clients looked at her like a piece of meat. She grew such thick skin over her soul that neither criticism nor rejection could pierce it. When years later she would become Barbara Stanwyck and play cynical, calculating predators in film noir, critics would marvel at her naturalistic acting. They didn't understand one thing: she wasn't acting. In the eyes of her characters, Phyllis Dietrichson from Double Indemnity or Martha Ivers, the audience saw the same icy chill she absorbed while sleeping on newspapers in the New York subway. Ruby Stevens died in those slums so that the indomitable Barbara Stanwyck could be born, a woman who would never again let anyone hurt her. Act 4. A Star is Born, The Nightmare with Frank Fay. If you've ever seen A Star is Born, whether it's the version with Judy Garland, Barbara Streisand, or Lady Gaga, you know the story. An aging mentor discovers a young, talented girl, propels her to fame, and then spirals into ruin, unable to cope with her success. Hollywood turned this tale into a romantic tragedy. But for Barbara Stanwyck, it was no melodramatic script. It was a blood-soaked horror that nearly cost her life. The real-life prototypes? Barbara Stanwyck and her first husband, vaudeville king Frank Fay. When they met in 28, the power dynamics were crystal clear. Frank Fay was Broadway royalty, a red-haired Irishman, the highest-paid comic in New York. His name blazed in the biggest letters on marquees. Barbara, then just a talented dancer named Ruby, looked up to him. In him, she saw everything she lacked: power, confidence, a father figure. She, a girl from the gutter, fell in love not so much with the man, but with the safety he symbolized. He was her ticket to the high life. They married and headed to conquer Hollywood. And it was here, on the sun-drenched California hills, that the trap snapped shut. The era of talkies was dawning. A seismic shift crushed the careers of hundreds of performers. Frank Fay, the stage king, was unfit for the screen. His theatrical style, his exaggerated gestures, looked absurd on camera. Studios tore up his contracts, but Barbara Stanwyck, rough, raw, real, was made for close-ups. The camera loved her truth. Her career shot straight up. For Fay, a man with a monstrously inflated ego, this was more than a blow. It was a personal insult. He couldn't forgive his wife for surpassing her creator. And so their lavish Brentwood mansion turned into a torture chamber. Fay started drinking, but booze didn't make him jolly or sleepy. It made him a sadist. Every evening became Russian roulette. He beat her methodically and brutally. Witnesses and biographers describe blood-chilling scenes. A drunken Fay might hurl a heavy vase at her, slap her in front of the staff, or worse, subject her to psychological terror. He drilled into her that she was talentless, that her success was a fluke, that she was ugly and unwanted by anyone but him. The worst part was that society back then sided with the husband. Domestic violence was a family matter, and a woman earning more than a man was seen as a violation of nature's laws. Stanwyck endured. She paid his debts, bailed him out of jail, hid bruises under thick makeup. Why? Because the old fear of orphanhood was stronger than the pain. She feared being alone. She thought a bad family was better than none. The nightmare climaxed when the violence crossed all boundaries. One version says that during a drunken fight, Fay, in a rage, threw their adopted son Dion into the pool, or threatened to, then turned on Barbara. At that moment, something switched inside her. The survival mechanism, dormant since her subway nights, roared back to life. She grasped a terrifying truth. This man wouldn't replace her father. He was that drunken streetcar passenger who once killed her mother. If she stayed, he'd destroy her, physically or mentally. The divorce from Frank Fay in 35 marked the birth of the Iron Lady. A different woman walked out of that courtroom. The illusion that a strong man could be a protector burned to ashes. She learned the lesson. A man's ego is as fragile as glass, and when it shatters, the shards cut the woman. This experience with Fay defined her life and career. She stopped seeking protection. She became the protector. In future relationships, including with Robert Taylor, she subconsciously chose the role of Frank Fay, the dominant partner in control, minus the violence and booze. She never again let any man hold financial or emotional power over her. When you watch her characters in the 30s films, women with cynical smirks who take hits and strike back, know this: it's not Stanislavski, it's Barbara Stanwyck, who returned each night to a monster until she found the strength to kill the victim inside and become the fiercest predator in the Hollywood jungle. Act 5. Rebellion against glamour. In the golden age of Hollywood's 30s, the Dream Factory churned out clones like a well-oiled machine. The studio system tolerated no individuality in physical appearance. When a young actress signed a contract, they sent her to the tuning department. Hair color changed, eyebrows plucked, starved to fainting, and the norm, trips to dentists and plastic surgeons. Marlene Dietrich had her molars removed to highlight her cheekbones. Rita Hayworth endured the agony of electrolysis to alter her hairline. An actress wasn't a person but a blank slate, shaped into the goddess standard. When Barbara Stanwyck stepped into the big studios, she breached all standards. She had a long, unconventional face, lips too thin, a low pelvis giving her a grounded walk, and, horror of horrors, crooked teeth with noticeable gaps. Producers looked at her and saw defective goods. They told her straight, if you want leading roles, you need to go under the knife and sit in the dentist chair. You need to become beautiful. Barbara Stanwyck's response set a precedent that changed the industry. She said no. It wasn't the whim of a spoiled diva. It was a cold, calculated move by a brilliant strategist. Stanwyck understood her nature better than any producer. She knew she could never compete with Greta Garbo or Hedy Lamarr in the realm of perfect beauty. If she fixed her teeth and nose, she'd become one of the many, just another pretty doll among hundreds. But by keeping her imperfections, she remained unique. I am who I am. Take it or go to hell, was her message. She intuitively tapped into the nerve of the times. It was the Great Depression. America was starving, standing in soup lines, losing hope. Audiences coming to the theater grew tired of porcelain goddesses sipping champagne in silks. These goddesses belonged to another world, untouchable and irritating. Barbara Stanwyck offered them an alternative. She was the face of the crowd. Her imperfect teeth, sharp features, her voice roughened by cheap tobacco, all screamed reality. Women in the audience saw themselves in her, tired, battered by life, but unbroken. Men saw not an unattainable ideal, but a woman they could approach in a bar, a woman who understood what it meant to lose a job or the last of their money. She turned her flaws into powerful acting tools. Her imperfect smile could be disarmingly sincere, like a child's, then morph into a predatory grin, dripping with sarcasm. Her low, untheatrical voice resonated with truth. In Stella Dallas, she played a vulgar, tasteless working-class woman who sacrifices everything for her daughter. She wasn't afraid to look ridiculous, fat, sweaty, and unattractive on screen. A glossy star would never stoop to such humiliation. Stanwyck turned it into a triumph, earning an Oscar nomination. Her refusal of surgery and veneers rebelled against falsehood. She proved that sexuality isn't about perfect facial proportions, but about energy, intelligence, and danger. In Double Indemnity, she wears a cheap blonde wig that looks deliberately fake, but her animal magnetism is so strong that the hero, and the audience, is willing to follow her even to the electric chair. Barbara Stanwyck became the first star to sell not her looks, but her personality. She made Hollywood play by her rules. The camera had to adjust to her, not the other way around. In the end, her rough face became the symbol of an era of strong women who survived not because of beauty, but despite everything. She kept her teeth and her face because they were the only things that truly belonged to her, and she wasn't about to hand them over to the studio bosses for melting down. Act 6. Double Indemnity, Birth of Pure Evil. In '44, cinema took a turn it couldn't come back from. Before then, movies had a clear line: good girls, victims, saviors, mothers, and bad girls, fallen women who always repented or died in the end. Evil in a woman's guise was either cartoonish or excused by passion. But when Billy Wilder's noir Double Indemnity hit the screens, audiences saw something their minds weren't ready for. They saw Phyllis Dietrichson brought to life by Barbara Stanwyck. This was the birth of the femme fatale archetype in its purest, most distilled form. A woman who kills not for love, not out of jealousy, not even for revenge. She kills for money and boredom. And the scariest part, she has no conscience. When Billy Wilder first offered Stanwyck the role, the Iron Lady got cold feet. Until then, her roles were built on the tough exterior, soft interior image. Her characters could be rough, could steal, but the audience always knew she had a heart of gold, just a victim of circumstances. Phyllis Dietrichson had no heart at all. She had a calculator. "I can't play this, Billy," Stanwyck said. "She's too dark. The audience will hate me." Wilder replied with a line that went down in history. "You're right, but tell me, Barbara, are you a mouse or an actress?" That challenge hit home. Stanwyck took the role, and the way she crafted it became a benchmark for acting. First, she and Wilder designed a look that still sparks debate among film scholars: that cheap blonde wig. When producers saw the first tests, they were horrified. "She looks vulgar. That wig looks fake, like it was bought at a discount store," they shouted. But that was the genius of it. Barbara Stanwyck insisted on this look. She wanted the audience to feel from the first frame, there's nothing real about this woman. Her hair is fake, her smile is fake, her words are fake. This cheap look highlighted the rotten core of a character trying to pass as high society while remaining a predator from the suburbs. Stanwyck's performance in Double Indemnity is a masterclass in minimalism. She stripped away all the usual acting crutches. No hysterics, no tears, no hand-wringing. Her Phyllis Dietrichson is calm, like a snake. Remember the scene of her first meeting with Fred McMurray's character? She's on the stairs, wrapped only in a towel, looking down at him. There's no passion in her eyes, only calculation. She looks at the man not as a lover, but as a carpenter looks at a hammer. Will this tool do to crack my husband's skull? This is where the line between Barbara Stanwyck and her character blurs, and that's why the role is so chillingly authentic. Stanwyck didn't need to imagine what it was like to use men for survival. Her whole life was a training ground for this role. Phyllis wants to kill her husband for a $100,000 insurance policy. Barbara married Taylor for status and security. Phyllis manipulates an insurance agent to do her dirty work. Barbara manipulated studios and agents to land the best contracts. Of course, Stanwyck wasn't a killer, but she knew cold calculation. She understood the psychology of a woman who realizes, in a man's world, her body and mind are her only weapons. She infused Phyllis with her own steel will, her cynicism forged in subway flophouses. Audiences were shocked at how comfortably America's sweetheart slipped into the skin of a sociopath. In the final scene when McMurray's character shoots her, there's no remorse on Stanwyck's face, just the surprise of a player who lost the game. "I never loved you, Walter, until this moment," she says, and it's possibly the only truth her character ever speaks, because she, like Stanwyck herself, could only respect someone stronger than her. Double Indemnity made Barbara Stanwyck the highest-paid actress of 44 for a reason. Hollywood wasn't paying for beauty. They paid her for showing the world a new type of woman, a predator unapologetic for her appetite. She legitimized female aggression on screen. And though the villainess dies in the film, a nod to censorship, in reality, Barbara Stanwyck won. She proved she could be pure evil and still keep the audience glued to her every move. Act 7. The Set's Queen, Why They Called Her Missy. In the hierarchy of Hollywood's golden age, an unspoken but rigid caste system echoed a feudal order. At the top sat the gods, the A-list stars. They lived in private trailers, dined on fine china, and viewed the crew, lighting techs, makeup artists, cameramen, carpenters, as mere furniture. A 100-person crew often waited 4 hours for a prima donna to emerge, fussing over the wrong lipstick shade. Marilyn Monroe could halt a shoot over her despair, Judy Garland over pills. Barbara Stanwyck was the only Olympian who descended to earth and led the proletariat. In the industry, she earned the nickname Missy, a warm, familial term usually reserved for a beloved older sister or a respected matriarch. But the essence of this relationship ran deeper than mere friendliness. Barbara Stanwyck became a legend among the stagehands, the film industry's blue-collar workers, not because she smiled at them, but because she was one of them. Every morning, entering the set, she performed a ritual that shocked rookie directors. She greeted every crew member by name. This wasn't the empty politeness of a politician before an election. She knew the chief lighting tech had a newborn daughter last week and asked, "How's little Susie?" She knew the camera assistant's wife was ill and would quietly slip him an envelope with money for doctors, warning, "Tell anyone, and I'll kill you." Her professionalism embodied empathy. Stanwyck was famous for knowing the script by heart, not just her lines, but everyone's. She was one-take Stanwyck. Why? Not just to save film. She understood the physics of the shoot. She knew the lighting tech held a heavy spotlight aloft, and every extra minute of her whims or mistakes was agony in his muscles. She knew extras were paid by the hour, and if filming dragged on, they'd miss the last bus home. To Ruby Stevens, the girl who packed boxes in a department store basement, these people were her own. And the producers in expensive suits, smoking cigars in offices, were the others. There's a famous story that best illustrates her status as Queen of the Workers. On the set of a Western, a renowned director started yelling at a young girl. An assistant responsible for continuity over a minor mistake. He humiliated her in front of the crew, reducing her to tears. Stars usually ignored such scenes. They were servant squabbles. Barbara Stanwyck stopped the shoot. She approached the director, fully in makeup and costume, and in an icy voice, the same voice as Phyllis Dietrichson, said, "One more word in that tone, and I'm walking off this set. And you'll explain to the studio why we're idle while you stroke your ego." The set fell silent. The director apologized. She was a one-woman union, the only superstar who openly advocated for stunt performers' rights. Back then, stuntmen were expendable, often injured without compensation. Stanwyck, who loved doing her own stunts, riding horses, falling down stairs, demanded that stunt performers receive insurance in decent conditions. That's why they called her Missy or Mrs., with the tone reserved for royalty. Lighting techs set the lights to hide her wrinkles and highlight her eyes. It was their gift, their way of saying, "Thank you." Cameramen chose the best angles. If Stanwyck asked for silence, not even a fly buzzed. This was authority money couldn't buy or a contract couldn't dictate. She created a unique atmosphere of matriarchy. Directors might think they were in charge, but everyone on set knew. If a fire broke out, we wouldn't listen to the guy in the cap with the megaphone, but to that woman with crooked teeth and a steely gaze. Because she wouldn't abandon us. Because she remembered what it was like to be a small cog in a vast, ruthless machine. And as long as she was there, the machine wouldn't crush us. Act 8, TV Renaissance, matriarch of the Wild West. By the mid-60s, Hollywood had turned into a brutal place for actresses over 50. The Dream Factory mercilessly discarded yesterday's goddesses. For aging stars like Bette Davis or Joan Crawford, only one humiliating niche remained, the gerontological horror genre, like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, where they played mad, grotesque old women, scaring audiences with their decay. It was public mockery of their former glory. Barbara Stanwyck, 58 at the time, looked at this freak show and did what she always did. She told the system to go to hell and forged her own path. She turned her gaze to television. Back then, for a movie star of her caliber, moving to TV was considered career suicide, an admission of defeat. The small screen was a ghetto for failures. But Stanwyck, with her predator's financial instinct, saw not a demotion, but a field of untapped opportunities. She signed on for the lead role in the Western series, The Big Valley. But before signing the contract, she issued an ultimatum that completely reshaped the script. Producers initially envisioned her character, Victoria Barkley, as a typical, kind grandma, sitting on the porch, knitting socks, waiting for her cowboy sons to come home for coffee. "I won't play an old lady in a rocking chair," Stanwyck declared in an icy tone. "I won't be the one just serving cookies. I'll be the head of the clan. I'll be the one making decisions, and I'll be riding horses." Thus, Victoria Barkley was born, a character that became a television reincarnation of Barbara herself. She was a commanding widow, ruling a vast 19th century California ranch with an iron hand. She wore not bonnets but Stetson hats and riding pants. She didn't wait for men to save her. She saved her sons herself. Stanwyck effectively legitimized a new archetype on screen, a strong, sexy, active older woman who hadn't lost her zest for life. But the most shocking aspect of this role was Stanwyck's physical obsession. At 60, she refused stunt doubles for most action scenes. It wasn't vanity, it was a show of strength. She seemed to say to the whole industry, "Look at me, I'm tougher than your 20-year-old starlets." There's a documented episode that became legendary among stuntmen. In one episode, the script called for a horse to bolt, dragging Stanwyck's character along the ground, her foot caught in the stirrup. The director, of course, prepared a dummy and a male stunt double in a wig. Barbara silently pushed them aside. "I'll do it myself," she said. Producers turned pale with fear. The insurance company threatened to cancel the policy, but Mrs. was unyielding. She lay in the dust, tied her foot to the stirrup, and the horse galloped off. The 60-year-old woman was dragged several dozen yards over rocks and dirt. When the call of "cut" came, the crew froze in horror, expecting to see broken bones. Stanwyck stood up, dusted off her jacket, adjusted her hat, and asked, "Well, did we get it? Or do you need another take?" Why did she do it? Psychologists might say it was her way of battling the fear of death and oblivion. But the truth was simpler and harsher. She was Ruby Stevens, a girl from the slums who was used to earning every cent. She despised laziness and weakness. If she was paid to play a woman of the Wild West, she became a woman of the Wild West, bruises and all. On the Big Valley set, she became the matriarch, not just in the script, but in reality. Young actors, Lee Majors, Linda Evans, looked up to her like a deity. Linda Evans later recalled, "I was a pretty doll afraid of the camera. Barbara grabbed me by the scruff and taught me to be a professional. She told me, never be late, know your lines, and never complain. You're not here to be pretty, you're here to work." 4 years of filming, 112 episodes. The Big Valley made Stanwyck an icon for a new generation of viewers who hadn't even seen her black and white films. She won an Emmy, proving that talent doesn't have an expiration date. While her peers withered in gilded cages or locked themselves in dark mansions, mourning their lost youth, Barbara Stanwyck galloped across the California plains, gripping the reins as tightly as she held her fate. She beat time again, proving that old age is a concept for the weak. For the Iron Lady, there was only the next shooting day. Act 9. Night of Intrusion, the final battle. By 81, Barbara Stanwyck had become a living monument to herself. She was 74. She lived in a swanky part of Beverly Hills, in a house more fortress than home. It embodied her life philosophy: high walls, sturdy gates, alarms. Inside, silence reigned. No husband, no kids, no wild parties. Just Mrs., her glasses of water, a pack of cigarettes, and the TV. She'd long since stopped starring in big films, but the grit forged in Brooklyn street fights and studio system intrigues hadn't vanished. It lay dormant, like an old war dog. And on the night of October 27th, that dog had to wake for one last fight. It all went down like a script from the cheapest thriller, the kind Stanwyck would have turned down for its cliché plot. Around 1 in the morning, an unknown man burst into her bedroom. He slipped in through a sliding glass door, the very breach in her defenses she always worried about. Pause here to recall one of Stanwyck's most famous roles, in Sorry, Wrong Number, from '48. She played a bedridden, helpless woman who accidentally learns over the phone that she's about to be killed, spending the screen time in hysteria and paralyzing fear, awaiting the inevitable end. Audiences wept at her vulnerability. But on that night in '81, the burglar met not a movie heroine, but Ruby Stevens. Woken by a flashlight in her face, the 74-year-old woman didn't scream for help. She didn't faint or beg for mercy, offering her jewels. Her first reaction was fury. How dare he? How dare he breach her territory? The intruder expected a frail old lady, paralyzed by fear. Instead, he faced a fury. Stanwyck tried to fight back. It sounds insane, a senior lady against a young thug, but it's true. She wasn't going down without a fight. In response, the burglar struck her with a gun, or a heavy flashlight, accounts vary, on the head. The blow was brutal, meant to knock her out. Blood soaked the sheets. Then he dragged her into a closet and locked her in. For anyone else, this would have been the end, if not physically, then psychologically. A broken psyche, eternal fear of the dark, moving to a nursing home under constant guard. But what happened next proved once and for all, the Iron Lady wasn't just a mask. When the thief, having gathered jewelry worth thousands, fled, and Stanwyck managed to get out and call the cops, the officers were stunned. They found a woman with a busted head, covered in blood, but utterly composed. She gave her statement clearly, like a soldier. Her voice held no victim's tremor. It was cold steel, like a prosecutor. Moreover, in the days that followed, she flatly refused psychological help. She refused to move. She refused to change her lifestyle. Journalists tried to spin it into a "Stars Tragedy" headline, but Stanwyck shut them down with a single icy glare. "I was just robbed," she said as if talking about bad weather. "It happens. I'm alive. Go to hell." This incident became a grim yet fitting end to her relationship with the outside world. That night, she got final confirmation of her life's core theorem, formed at 4 after her mother's death. You're always alone. No walls, no millions, no fame can protect you when the door opens in the dark. Ultimately, between you and the abyss, there's only your own backbone. The burglar stole her jewels, but he couldn't steal her dignity. He wanted to make her a victim, but she turned the episode into a demonstration of her unbreakability. Even with a cracked head, locked in a closet, she remained in control because her spirit was unbreakable. It was her last fight, and despite the physical defeat, morally, she emerged victorious. She survived. Again, as always. Act 10. The final curtain falls. On January 20th, 1990, at St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica, a heart that had beaten like the most reliable engine in Hollywood for over 80 years finally stopped. Barbara Stanwyck passed away at 82. Complications from emphysema and heart failure claimed her life. Here lies the last dark irony of her fate. Emphysema is a smoker's disease. Barbara picked up smoking at 9, back when she was little Ruby Stevens. She didn't light up to look glamorous with a cigarette holder like the silk-clad divas. She smoked to fit in with the rough crowd in factory backrooms and telephone exchanges, to dull hunger pangs, to stay warm in the cold subway. This habit, her lifelong companion, her raspy, smoke-tinged voice, was her calling card, came from the poverty-stricken childhood she spent her life running from. In the end, the past caught up and claimed her last breath. But it wasn't her manner of passing that spoke volumes. It was what followed. In Hollywood, the death of a star of her magnitude always becomes a grand spectacle. When legends like Rudolph Valentino or Judy Garland died, it turned into a national frenzy. Thousands of weeping fans, streets shut down, lavish funerals with long speeches, marble tombs buried in flowers. It's the final act of the show, where the star's corpse becomes the centerpiece for public mourning. Barbara Stanwyck, true to herself to the very end, refused to partake in this charade. While still alive, she penned a will that shocked her agents and friends. It laid out strict, non-negotiable instructions. No funeral, no memorial service, no public farewell, no grave. She banned turning her death into a social event. She knew the worth of Hollywood tears. She understood that her funeral would attract people who hated her, envied her, or just wanted to be seen in dark glasses by the cameras. She despised phoniness in all its forms and had no intention of starring in the final act of hypocrisy. "I don't want anyone gawking at me when I can't stare back," was the subtext of her decision. Instead of a plot at Forest Lawn or Hollywood Forever, where her peers rest, she chose the wind. As per her wishes, they cremated her body, and they scattered her ashes from a helicopter over Lone Pine, California. This choice of location was deeply symbolic. Lone Pine is a harsh, rocky desert at the foot of the Sierra Nevada. It's not a world of glamour, palms, and pools. It's the world of westerns. Many of her films in the series The Big Valley shot their outdoor scenes there. It's a place where only the strong survive. Dry land, blazing sun, sharp rocks, and piercing wind. It was a landscape that perfectly matched the terrain of her own soul, beautiful in its stark truth, unyielding and eternal. Barbara Stanwyck vanished, leaving no stone idol behind. Fans have no place to lay flowers. Tourists have no gravestone for selfies. She erased herself from the physical world as cleanly as she once erased an ex-husband from her life. Her finale was the ultimate triumph of independence. She doesn't belong to the earth. She doesn't belong to cemetery bureaucracy. She doesn't even belong to history in the usual sense. She became part of the air above the America she conquered. In the end, Barbara Stanwyck's story isn't a Cinderella tale. Cinderella needs a fairy godmother and a prince. Ruby Stevens needed nothing but her own will. She rose from the slums where she slept on newspapers, bought Hollywood, brought the government to its knees, survived love's betrayal, kept her dignity in old age, and left for eternity on her own terms, never letting anyone see her weak, not even in a coffin. Hollywood sold illusions. Barbara Stanwyck was the only reality in this city of lies, and when she left, reality ended. All that remained was the myth of the Iron Lady, too strong to be happy, too proud to regret it. Barbara Stanwyck left undefeated. She showed us what pure, distilled power looks like, a state where you need no one to feel whole. She stood alone in a city full of spoiled children. She transformed her childhood nightmares not into hysteria, but into the concrete foundation of her empire. The Iron Lady proved, if you don't wait for a savior, you become one yourself. We've dissected a unique survival case. It's a guide on how to turn the fear of poverty into millions and physical flaws into weapons of mass destruction. Stanwyck taught us that in a world of illusions, only those who dare to be terrifyingly real win. Barbara Stanwyck survived because she killed the child within and became a steel warrior. But Hollywood's history knows the opposite example. An idol the world sees as the symbol of male coolness, independence, and rebellion. We're used to seeing James Dean as a system breaker, a guy in a leather jacket who spat on the rules. But what if I told you that's the greatest lie of pop culture? Watch the video where I dismantle the myth of the rebel without a cause. You'll see that his defiance was not strength, but a pathological plea for attention. You'll learn that behind the macho image lay a fragile, abandoned boy who was terrified of silence. The tragedy of James Dean, a child who never learned to live without applause. Subscribe so you don't miss new videos about new heroes.